It's Friday, it's April 12th, 2024. I'm wearing my jersey with the number and name on the back. I'm inside of the United States of America with a Federal Reserve note, an ONE, and an In God We Trust, along with Jackson and the White House. I'm under this particular flag, and on the front of the property magazines are these symbols, whatever they mean. Yesterday, which was April 11th, I got on Linda's email, she received from DOE, one of the DOE representatives, one of the principals inside the school of New York City, a email speaking or asking for attendance. Now, what's interesting is, as I leave mcms158 on the outside of the building, there is a seal. And when I translate the Latin, I know what it reads. I put it up on my Facebook yesterday as mention of. So I receive by the principal this email for a conversation. It says, let's talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion. How we can prioritize these things. And they chose 411 as the date. So, it was in the Parent Welcome Center. And at the bottom of the email, it says students, faculty, and staff are invited. So being that I'm part of the SLT and my mother tells me this is going on in the community, in this building that's like a public building with the seal of whatever, I go in, I sit, there's an American flag. Once I walk into the building, and there's this gigantic tree that they built it with paper. And it says the Asian Club. And it's this big ornate like display on paper on the wall. Then I walk down the hall past the main office, and strewn up from like up just above, like where you walk underneath them, are all of these mini flags, mini pennants flags, that I don't recognize. I wasn't taught. I mean, like if I knew World Cup or if I knew the Olympics, if I cared, I might know what these countries or these labels and mini square rectangles or squares meant. Very reminiscent, by the way, of Star Trek. What a couple of the reference artwork pieces that I use, like going into Unimatrix 1. So I walk into this room, and underneath all this like Unimatrix, whatever it means, and I get there, and in the corner of the parent teacher conference is this American flag that I recognize since youth. Second grade, I believe, is when they introduced it. When I was in the city school district in Bayside, back in like 1980 something, before I was moved to safety, they had this ridiculous flag something or other, and it was very diverse, like it was, but there were, like, again, ratios matter, and whatever and the whatever. So here I am on actual statistical data, like raw calculations of calcaneus calculus. And like my Italian grandfather bought a home in a Polish Irish neighborhood as a Northern Italian, having a granddaughter who is going to be like raised here in Bayside, and then sending me to the public school, but it's not Irish nor Polish when I get there. So that gets confusing in 1980. Um, so I go into this building yesterday with now having a son in the same neighborhood that my grandfather purchased into, paid taxes all the way through, same as my father. And same house, same deed, same piece of property. And but be like under attack from outside influence or confluence, and I'm not quite sure how or why or from where. Not in, like, there was no vote. I didn't get a vote to say like, yeah, sure, come on over. No, like, I would have been very happy having like exclusivity in neighborhoods in order to be raised with like a group that I could have like traveled and journeyed with for life. Like, that's optimal, but that's not what I was delivered to for some reason. So I go into this, and now I'm in this circle, and it's the year 2024. It's no longer 1983. Nicole's now 45 years old, has now had 4 kids, and has had relationship issues in situationships, which I call toilet paper. Um, and so I go into this room, and I'm sitting down in the public school, and there is the principal or the assistant principal of the school in this room, for actuary purposes. um and I'm surrounded, like, the majority of the persons in the circle, like, I'm the only one of me or my kind. The woman to the left of me says that her ancestors were from Israel. And then the persons in the rest of the circle, which outnumber myself and the woman to the left of me, um, they're wanting to speak about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the woman who asked for the meeting is wearing a Puerto Rican flag. And she works in healthcare, in introducing diversity, equity, and inclusion into the healthcare field. So now already my bristles are up, and I'm thoroughly annoyed at what this whole setup is. But I'm there. I show up. I'm representing myself and my son. And I'm there in aid of the one that's outnumbered in this circle of whatever this is. So under the guise of its community, I'm like, no, you're not from, like, my grandfather bought specifically in a zip code that was Polish and Irish descent. How it then went somewhere into Korean and now is in this circle setup makes no sense to me. So anyway, so I get in there, and so the woman who asked for the meeting starts off introducing her son, who was there. My son was not present at this meeting. And she wants to talk about discrimination with her son. And I wait. I let them go through their whatever their like trained speech is. And I wait for my turn, and I said, okay. I was like, so here's my story, just so you're all aware. I'm now living and raising my son in the same house I was brought back from the hospital I was like, I went to PS31 for 1 year, and then I was moved to what I feel was safety elsewhere. Um, but in my father's business was attacked through the court system, and he moved us back to Queens in 1995-96. In 1995-96, I entered Bayside High School, but I had to go through metal detectors, and there was a school safety officer there. And I was driving a Saab at the time, 10-year-old Saab. uh, there was a house decision that I should go to a parochial school or private school. So they sent me to St. John's Prep in Astoria. I was like, I get to St. John's Prep. And the person's at the door. Now, I'm under the seal and I'm with a principal inside the United States of America while I'm saying this. I was like, and I get to this school in 95-96, and the person who is registering me for that school of St. John's Preparatory in Astoria, class of 1996, tells me that there are no like white European clubs. There's an African, there's a Latin, there's an Asian, but there's nothing prepared for me. I was like, so there was no after school activities, there was no society, there was no anything I was being introduced to. They already told me that I was not included. So here I am at this diversity, equity, and inclusion class, letting the circle know that my real world and life experience inside the United States of America, inside of New York, within my lifetime, preparing to have children in the same house and neighborhood that my grandfather bought into, was told in 1995-96 that there was no inclusive high school in Astoria for me at that time. It was already exclusively not me. Really? So I wind up graduating and whatever. I was like, and now I am back. I was like, and the interesting thing for me is that it is, I'm like, if I sit here now in this year and I think of mathematical and statistical data and just how it's shifted, I was like, it does not make sense as a taxpayer and as parental units that had ownership in the area, how it could have shifted or drifted so far off that for my own time frame and for, I mean, as far as planning goes, so that's of concern. And then after that meeting, I turn on the evening news, and there's two stories. One is of a fisherman writing out the word help on the beach, which then the U.S. Coast Guard sees. And then there's another one about the U.S. Navy having the scope, a professional rifleman having the scope turned backwards. Now, if I had looked at the photo, I would not have known because I'm not rifle trained. I'm not, again, that's not my area of expertise. But that story is on, which I'm going to make mention of. And while I was in this circle yesterday, interesting thing was somebody mentions, she says something about like, I'm not going to boil the oceans over this. And I'm like, that is a really bizarre saying, like, to perpetuate, because then somebody else picked up on that and started saying it. And I was like really sensitive topics. We're in climate change. Like the oceans really are boiling. Like the coral really is bleaching. Like it is a real serious problem. So what a weird saying to have picked up to be saying in this diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation after I just like made myself known that like this is my life story. This is since I've been here. Like how am I to interpret when I look back, hindsight being 2020? I mean, and they're trying to have this conversation about diversity, and I'm like, wouldn't this conversation have been really great to have in my parents' day and age, knowing that they had me as a daughter and I would want to have children, and like this being a very sensitive topic, and knowing like somewhere gardening matters and like the resources to garden properly matters. So I'm like, the stories just don't make sense to me because my parents' wishes for my well-being were not carried forward and were not acted upon properly. And now I'm in the situation where it's sliding backwards and my son is in a worse position than I was in when I arrived. Like it's just getting worse. It's not getting better. And I don't know who's claiming credit for these things, but like the actual stories do matter. Um so um so that was like an interesting part of the dynamic of the circle yesterday. So I'm going to pause this. I'm going to go up to those two stories that came up yesterday, also in headlines that I never followed. Same time frame, that 1995-96. OJ Simpson died. I did not follow the story. His driving of a white Bronco means I have no idea, like symbolically, what these things meant. I mean, he was an NFL. So what? I mean, like football wasn't my thing. Soccer certainly is not my thing. I'm not a sports aficionado. Um, so, and then after that diversity, equity, and inclusion meeting, I go into Kenta, where I've gone with someone else I met at Starbucks once before. And there was this person that at the time he had this very interesting look to him. And I saw him sitting there eating. And I didn't think much of it, but my eyes just kept getting drawn to him for some reason. Like this, like a, like they speak of like compelling someone or something to do something. It's almost like this subliminal response that my anatomy had. Like my eyes just kept being drawn to this man, and he's sitting there eating on his phone. And then when I came home, there's this new movie that's coming out in the movie theaters calling We Were the Lucky Ones. Um, and he looked like the lead actor from that. Again, I don't know the man's name. I've never seen him before, but it was just like this tie-in when I came home and saw it on the television. So I'm going to pause this for a second, and pull up what the televised broadcast service is saying. What I did also notice is in 1995-96, the anchors on the news desk looked very American, looked very monetary. And now when they like cut forward to what's in the airways and what's being broadcasting and in journalism, it's a lot of not us. It's a lot of children from elsewhere. Um, and it is such a stark contrast from where we were to where we are. And also the FBI director, Christopher Wray, is on, um, with a message about some concerns that he has. So I'm going to make note of that as well. I'm going to pause this for a second. So here, this was news at 5. It says help written on the beach.
On a remote island, they spelled, as you can see right there, help in the white sands of a beach in Micronesia. In case you need a refresher from geography class, that is an island nation in the North Pacific Ocean. U.S. Navy jets spotted the trio about a week after their boat became disabled, and they swam ashore. Until their rescue, they nourished themselves by eating coconuts and drinking from a small well created some time ago.
Write help as large letters as you could put into sand, and it worked. I mean, what are the odds of that?
It's like the Tom Hanks movie.
Castro is about to say, I have made fire.
Well, you're very good.
It's a great movie.
Very good.
So here's Australia right here as they go into their early fall, and there's Micronesia right here. A lot of clouds and around 80 degrees there.
All right, now this is the same 5 o'clock news by Channel 7, ABC. But this was the message from FBI Director Christopher Wray.
In testimony in Washington today, the theme, what's happening in the Mideast and Russia, could have grave repercussions here in the United States. FBI Director Chris Wray telling lawmakers on Capitol Hill he is worried about the possibility of lone wolf terrorist attacks inspired by conflicts overseas. Wray says the budget decrease for the FBI of about $500 million could not come at a worse time. He's also asking Congress to reauthorize the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which allows the government to collect information on foreign nationals without a warrant and sometimes collect data on Americans who interact with persons of interest.
It is critical for our ability to identify foreign terrorist organizations communicating with, inspiring, or working with people here in the U.S., and that's how we identify and stop attacks.
By the way, hardline House Republicans are opposed to reauthorizing FISA, is what it's called, without an amendment that would require the intelligence community to get an additional warrant to access Americans' data.
Well, still to come at 5 o'clock, a man wanted for robbing at least.
That really does make a confusing argument. Let me just put this here. With the fact that the only 2 options for technology inside where I am currently standing, that was sold to the consumers of America, through some, I mean, if they were selling them in there has to be something on FTC, at like FTC, FCC, and FAA inside the North American space arrangement. And so, but it comes from an outside adversary, which is a 5-letter pattern on the geological puzzle. I'm standing inside one of 48, and then one of 50, and then one of 7 for the whatever. But it really does bring up especially with the amount of bodies from children of elsewhere that are now like a slap. I mean, like, again, is that where like slap in the face? I mean, I heard one of the comedians mention that, on like the body of America. So it's just confusing how they're actually keeping anyone safe if they're having this much trouble, because the technology sold here is actually a foreign adversary's 5-letter pattern. So how do you keep the children of America safe from the adversary from elsewhere? That's where I'm like having this real problem, let's say, inside of my calcaneus calculus. So I'm going to pause this for a second. And then I'm going to go to Leland Vittert, not on Channel 7. He's on some independent channel called News Nation. And he was the one who has this naval scope conversation or piece that he had on last night. So I'm going to pause this for a second. He refers to himself as On Balance.
I am not a firearm person. Just not a gun guy. I never grew up with them. But even I know when you look through the scope of a rifle, you should see something, anything. A lesson apparently lost on the captain of a Navy warship forward deployed with the 7th Fleet. This is Commander Cameron Yaste reportedly watching a training drill. As the internet was quick to point out, based on the Instagram photo that the U.S. Navy posted, the scope on the rifle is backwards. And it's hard to tell, but perhaps even has the lens cap on. The post was up on the Navy's Instagram with the caption, "From engaging in practice gun shoots, conducting maintenance, testing fuel purity, and practicing in sea and anchor details, the hashtag U.S. Navy is always ready to serve and protect." Commander Yaste, by the way, is a previous combat systems and weapons officer who is also a weapons and executive officer. He attended the Naval Postgraduate School and got a master's degree in astronautics. For those of you who don't know, we looked it up. Astronautics is the study of spaceships.
That is so cool. What I don't understand is, like, I mean, and again, I get that there are people that were allowed these careers, but like, that is one of the coolest careers. And I see people who were allowed to do some incredible things, not only with space and exploration, but with healthcare, with communications, with travel, with research, with development, with businesses of all kinds, for which I was not allowed. So, or I was not given the opportunity or the network in order to make entryway into, still underneath this, but inside of New York, as a female, who wanted a husband, who wanted a spouse, who wanted to have children, who wanted to have a journey with someone, and coming from a respectful family. And I don't understand how, like, I mean, what a gift that this man received in order to have this level of career. Like, what an honor. Like, I mean, his country loved him. I'm feeling like the piece of the country that, like, the great almighty father forgot about or wasn't able to get to, wasn't able to reach in time. So I don't know why or how that happened, but like, this would have, like, if I was allowed to dream this big, like, that's where I probably would have sent myself. But again, I am stuck in a series of rooms, and I have yet to be able to find that hand to hold in order to get myself to anything worth living. Like, quality of life just doesn't exist.
Retired Navy SEAL Clint Emerson is here. Is it fair to ridicule the commander who's the captain of this ship?
I mean, in the SEAL teams, yes, it's completely fair. We have a saying, the root word to officer is office, and that's where they should probably hang out. The commanding officer is good at writing awards, writing evals, leading, managing money. These are the things they're good at. Let's hope that he is really good at shooting guided missiles, since that's what he is the CO of.
Yeah, no, look, it's a good point. I guess, you think about this just from a process standpoint. I get that you're not an expert in process of how things get on social media, but somebody had to hand him a weapon. Here, sir. He puts on his ear protection. He raises the weapon. Okay. Maybe he notices that things look really far away because the scope's backwards. Maybe he doesn't. But then somebody has to take a picture. The picture's got to get sent up to Big Navy. Then somebody's got to approve the picture. They've got to edit the picture. Then somebody puts it on social media. How is it possible that nobody noticed this?
That's a great question. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of discipline and awareness missing in the system, obviously, because if you don't see that as the CO as soon as you're handed that rifle, that's a huge issue. Most of the time in the military, we're graded on two big things, that's safety and performance, and he failed at both. Because if you don't know that rifle is really screwy, then you shouldn't be shooting it. And if you zoom in, he's on full auto. And that's why he's got a range safety officer holding his arm back there so that he doesn't spray everybody on the flight deck. But yeah, I don't know how it was missed. I really don't.
Well, at the same time, if you're a commanding officer, your responsibility is to at least know how things on your ship operate. Is it fair to extrapolate? And I say this because I never served, and I certainly have a lot of respect for anybody who's willing to put on the uniform, whether it be as an officer on a ship or in the SEAL teams or anywhere else. But is it fair to say about an officer that if you can't figure out how to make sure that when someone hands you a weapon that the scope's put on correctly, and if someone hands it to you and then someone takes a picture of it and you're firing it, maybe at that point you go back and you check and you figure out how to make sure is that picture doesn't get out. Is that fair to hold him responsible for that?
I would say so. I mean, you are managing a multi-billion-dollar vessel, right? That has guided missiles on it. And if you can't look at that weapon and know that something is wrong, then they probably should take a closer look at him and his career, because, you know, as soon as he put the optic up to his eye, he should have known something was wrong. As soon as he held
Right,
that
so they say.
forward, yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
I don't understand at all how something like this would happen unless there's a motivated sailor that decided to put it in his hand for the photo shoot joke.
Well, spoken like a man who may have pulled a few pranks in his days, but don't worry, we're out of time. We will not hold you responsible for them on television. Good to see you, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, let them eat cake. Jeff Bezos and his fiance.
And then so I go from that, and then I go into this morning's CBS, and they have on this representative with collar brass saying it's the US, and I'm like, after this DEI meeting yesterday with persons that look like in a group of, with no labels, of familiarity that is not familiar to my own, that have in my lifetime occluded me from being able to be like surrounded by familial beings. I just find it like, at what point, like, and where's that safety zone to call out to say, hey, is that an imposter? Like, inside of this Biden administration at such a critical level? I mean, especially when I take my son, after I've already had, inside of New York, I've already had problems with Queens property areas. I went to Brooklyn to do the U.S., the United States Sea Cadets, still in the same monetary system. And again, persons like what's got the U.S. on his uniform is saying to me, like, they're in charge of the program for Sea Cadets, and like, whatever, with my son being there. And I'm just like again, like at RMS, I mean, this is like really confusing between our RMS and an HMS, and like, what are these persons like in a GODONE and an IN and then a WE? I'm really concerned at TWO with the which way. I mean, it's like full on, and I'm like, did nobody notice this? I mean, nobody had time to say, hey kid, we don't leave a woman behind, especially one that wants to be with us and have kids and enjoy life. And like, really? You just abandon somebody in the field? Because it's what it really feels like at this point. So I only know of General George Washington. I haven't met any other generals. I don't know any other generals, but he's introducing this person as a general. And again, I don't have a way of fact checking like who gets to be a general. Like, these things weren't explained to us in the series of schools that I had access to.
C.Q. Brown Jr., the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the nation's highest ranking military officer. General Brown, thank you very much for being.
And that's according to Tony DeCopel on See the BS this morning. And the year is 2024. After, and I'll go to the O.J. Simpson bit, where the anchors did not look like this or this, and I have no idea what the U.S. looked like in a uniform at that point either. But things seem to be shifting. And I can feel it. I can see it. I've been at the deterioration end of it. I just don't know how to get to something better.
You were the primary advisor to the president and the Department of Defense on all matters military. This is quite a military morning because the country of Iran, which has already killed 3 U.S. soldiers in the Middle East and launched attacks through proxies on more than 100 U.S. positions, may now this morning attack Israel, our ally, with what we're hearing up to 150 cruise missiles and drones. How close are we, sir, to war in the Middle East?
Well, one of the things I'll tell you, Tony, is that we're really trying to avoid war. And this is part of the dialogue that I have with my counterparts within the region, to include the Israeli chief of defense, who I talked to yesterday. And we're doing things not only to prevent a war, but.
And the other thing is, like, I don't, if and only if he's a general, and if and only if he really is part of the U.S., what I don't understand is, how do these things get into vote? How do they go into alignment? And if it puts positions in the interior of the United States of America, like the children, the women having children, into harm's way very clearly, like if we're in clear and present danger, how could any of this in this pictorial image be going on? It doesn't even fit the monetary. So, like at church, being that it looks like a landing strip, and currently it feels like my father, who claims to be an atheist, at the heist. It's just really confusing.
But at the same time, one of my primary things is to make sure that all of our forces in the region are protected.
So how concerned are you, General? We have an American general on the ground in Israel, we're told, coordinating a potential response. If Iran launches a major attack from its own soil on our ally Israel, where we have an ironclad relationship, according to the president, is America, U.S. soldiers, drawn into a conflict once again in that region?
Well, that's the, of course it could be a potential, but that's the thing that we're trying to avoid, which is why we're engaging. I've talked to my Israeli counterpart since, I took over from 1 October, 7 October was when Hamas went into Israel. And so I've talked to my counterpart on a regular basis to help us better see where the threat is, how we should respond, all to make sure that we avoid a conflict. That was one of our goals when we first came right after 7 October.
I know we're talking, but are we preparing? Yeah.
Are you worried? What's your level of concern here, sir?
And are we preparing? Are we preparing for it just in case? Because they said they're going to do it.
Yeah.
One of the things that, in my role as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs is to provide options for the president and for the nation, and the same with Secretary Austin. And so we're always planning and preparing. That's one thing we do very well, is plan and prepare. And, I could not be prouder of our force and the work that they.
So, if he was really in alignment with doing right by the United States of America, the children, such as myself, who are, again, flower in the garden, going to have fruit and come to fruition in time management, then the question would be, if you're always planning and you're always strategizing, and my life has shown up the way that it has, that would be indicative of you were planning this all along to completely, take away my quality of life and that of my children. Because that's the only logical explanation for the way they've carried this, how they've carried this out inside of New York, and from... He's now claiming to be Joint Chiefs of Staff. So where is at monetary system and at church, where is my safety net in this all?
We do day in and day out to ensure that we are prepared for whatever might occur.
General, speaking of planning and preparing, the head of USAID says famine has begun in parts of Gaza, and the plan is to prepare a pier in order to bring aid in, but the construction has not started yet. Do you have an anticipation of when that is going to start, and what are the difficulties in that process?
Well, we intend to start here in the next couple of weeks to get the pier in. At the same time, we're working very closely with the aid agencies within Gaza and bringing other capability in. The real key point is what we want to do is, as we engage with the Israelis, is particularly when you're operating in a urban area, to avoid civilian casualties, but at the same time bring in the humanitarian aid. We're on track to bring in the capability. One of the things we're also, again, focused on is the protection of the pier as it comes in. And we're working that with our asset, but also with the Israelis.
Is that the most difficult challenge, preventing civilian casualties?
Well, I mean, any major any operational conflict, and I was the air component commander during the Defeat ISIS campaign, when particularly when we did Mosul, and you really focus on how do you minimize collateral damage and civilian casualties.
Well, when you think about how the U.S. and its coalition forces performed against ISIS in Mosul with civilians in the way, and you look at how the IDF and Netanyahu in Israel has performed in Gaza, the U.S. has Joe Biden has called it, President Biden has called it a mistake, said it was over the top. Militarily, what's your assessment of how Israel has conducted this war?
Well, it's a very complex environment, and this is an area that I've talked to my counterpart on a regular basis, other leaders within Israeli defense establishment, of doing everything they can to minimize civilian casualties, realizing they're operating in a very dense urban environment in some cases, which makes it a bit more difficult. I'd also highlight that Hamas.
Why would you take an already complex situation and add complexion into it as leaders, supposedly or allegedly? Just curious.
Surrounds themselves with civilians, which makes it even more difficult to be able to minimize civilian casualties.
Does Israel then create more terrorists by striking civilians in its effort to get to Hamas?
Well, their goal is to really, as you know, to destroy Hamas. But at the same time, they want to have peace and stability for Israel, but also in the region. And again, this is a conversation that I have on a regular basis, not only with Israel, but many of the other counterparts.
Speaking of Israel, Teofrio comes to me today, 1975, the bull from 1975, because he's astrologically a Taurus, just so, like, astronomical terms understands in, like, the house of astrology for, like, birthing cycles. He comes to me today, and he says something which struck me. He's like, something about Noah, the flood, something about Shem and Ham. And I'm like, wow, Teofrio. I was like, you actually do have one piece of intelligence that is very useful at this point. I said, normally you're like an insult to my intelligence. He's like, you're an insult to my intelligence. He's like, Luke is talking. I'm like, yeah, okay. So I'm over it. I was like, no, but back me up for a second. Go ahead. Explain to me this story that you learned. He's like, it's biblical. He's like, didn't you learn it? I'm like, no. So he went through that, and I was like, that's interesting, those two words. So I'm going to pause this for a second, and then I'm going to go back to this O.J. Simpson thing where the anchors in 1995-96 at the news desk at whatever was broadcasting was monetary church correct at Air Force level, at least, because it seems like since then it's deteriorated and only gotten worse. So I'm going to pause this for a second. Now, what's interesting is I've had no working, active, like, practical knowledge of this entire, like, how this all threads together. But it's Nicole Brown Simpson, or Nicole Brown and O.J. Simpson at, like, witchcraft and other things. It seems like really theatrically important. At the time, I couldn't see it, but now in hindsight and retro, it seems critical as to what the scene of the crime looked like back then at multiple levels.
Opener is presented by Progressive, making it easy.
Especially since now the Air Force person, the chair during the Biden administration, is this CQ Brown, but it's a different complexion than Nicole Brown from back in 1995, 96. Like, again, the spin, the news, like the way that they weave this together, it's just...
To bundle insurance.
Talk about that a little later. We have to begin this morning with a reaction to the death of O.J. Simpson, who divided Americans along racial lines when he was charged, then acquitted of murdering his ex-wife Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ron Goldman. Simpson had a long and complicated legacy, and there's no one better to have here this morning than 60 Minutes correspondent Bill Whitaker. He covered the trial for CBS News nearly 30 years ago. Bill, they didn't call it the trial of the century for nothing. This was 1995. You had a front row seat.
I did indeed. Simpson's trial was must-see TV, with enduring characters and images that still resonate to this day. Chief among them was Simpson himself, a former football star used to outrunning the competition. In the summer of 1994, he found out he could only run so far. This is one of the most indelible scenes of the 20th century. O.J. Simpson in a white Ford Bronco. It was June of 1994, and Simpson was on the run. Days after police came across a gruesome murder scene at the home of his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson. She had been brutally stabbed along with her friend, Ronald Goldman. Simpson later surrendered and declared his innocence, spawning a legal showdown that became known as the trial of the century. The prosecution was led...
I'm running out of memory on my phone. All right, so it's star 1978, star 8378, Nicole Cattaruzza, it's Earth, solar system, Milky Way universe, galaxy is broken, and it's Bayside Station, Bayside, New York, 11361.